Greetings and welcome to this special edition of Pennsylvania in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. Joining me for part 2 of our discussion on higher education funding in Pennsylvania is Pennsylvania editor Kristen Smith. Kristen, last week we dug into hundreds of millions of dollars in research grants awarded to 3 prominent Pennsylvania universities from Biden-era spending bills, and an ongoing debate over whether the federal government should be spending so much on such research because of the administrative bloat it leads to and other potential impacts on taxpayers and students. Today, let's talk about the 2 different higher education systems in the state, how they are funded differently. It is budget season after all, and how the 2 systems are on an unequal footing. Why don't we start by explaining the 2 different systems, Kristen?
Okay, at its most basic level, we have something called state-related universities, which is probably what everyone thinks of when they think of Pennsylvania, which would be Penn State, University of Pittsburgh, and then Temple University and Lincoln University. And they're called state-related because they are in the state and they get a little bit of funding from the state government, but they get a lot of funding from the federal government and philanthropic donations. Then there's what we have, the Pennsylvania system of higher education. And that includes 14 universities that are state run. And that means that they get the majority of their funding from the state. And so that's the easiest way to describe the difference.
And the state-based systems, such as Penn State, University of Pittsburgh, Temple, they have large endowments compared to the other schools. Is that correct?
Correct. We are looking at multi-billion dollars for the state-related versus, millions for the state-run schools. I think of the more successful schools, their numbers for endowments are in the 65 million-ish range. So as compared to something like Penn State, where they have $22 billion. So you're looking at a very wide gap here in terms of resources that these universities have.
Right. But both groups go before the state legislature every year during budget season and make requests, and the legislature has to decide how much to fund them.
Absolutely. And it's certainly more high stakes for the state run system, again, because they get so much funding from the state, and they've really been highlighted as the way for Pennsylvania to kind of climb out of its demographic hole that it's in by attracting college students to Pennsylvania to come to school here and then stay here and work here, because we have a real problem with losing younger workers to other states that have better opportunities for them. And one of the ways that PASSHE does that is by maintaining a really affordable tuition. They have not raised tuition in 7 years. And that's pretty remarkable when you consider the inflationary pressures that everyone is facing, not to mention state government and the state-run system. And when you think about, for example, the tuitions at the state-related universities like Penn State and Pitt, where that have continued to go up despite getting all of this additional funding, having large endowments, and having just more resources in order to fund their programs and to keep tuition affordable for students.
So where are they at in the various groups in the budgeting process?
It's a great question. Our budget in Pennsylvania is due June 30th, but leadership has already signaled that that is just a goal that they don't plan on reaching. And so the funding for PASSHE and for the state related is really tied up in that. I'm sure that the universities will just continue on, but there's going to be a great uncertainty for them, which trickles down to the students. It's really not a great place for, administrators to be, as far as not being able to say what their finances are going to be for the next year. There's an added element to this, a pretty large element, and that's from Congress and their budget bill that they're working on, One Big Beautiful Budget. There's a lot of changes to higher education funding that would make a massive difference even for state-related universities. They're talking about reducing Pell Grants for lower-income students, but also reforming how student loans are written by the government, because there's wide agreement that they're predatory and that middle-class students are really helping to fund these universities because of their endless supply of student loans that will help fund them and can, by some critics argue, allow them to continue raising tuition despite all of these other costs that are coming and all these other resources that are coming to them. So it's perhaps in more, much more so than years past, these universities are really in limbo as far as what the federal government's going to do, what the state government's going to do. The state government is looking to what the federal government is going to do. So this is really, I mean, it's a mess, quite frankly.
And this isn't exclusive to Pennsylvania, although that's our focus today, of course, but what's going on in Congress with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, what, President Trump, since taking office has, he of course created the Department of Government Efficiency, which has been looking at what it considers to be bloat or waste or fraud and cutting that. And the federal government is on a different fiscal year than the state of Pennsylvania, for example. So I can understand how much uncertainty that is creating. What do you expect when it comes to the budget? June 30th is a deadline, you said, but they're probably not going to hit that. How much work is left to do at the state level?
At the state level, there again, that's a great question. The sticking points have nothing to do with higher education. As far as we know, the state is more focused on mass transit funding, on regulating and taxing skill games. They do always have a pretty strong focus on education as a whole, and there has been more money given to the state system year after year. That's because that is their main responsibility as the state, is to fund that system. State relateds have been more controversial for a lot of the reasons that I discussed before. They're very dependent on federal research dollars. They might have policies that, again, have nothing to do with federal research, such as how they feel about transgender athletes and how they compete on their athletic teams. And so they've kind of been the target of the Trump administration as far as looking for that waste, fraud, and abuse. And that's kind of what our research was going to with this story, was to kind of really take a deep dive at these three very public facing universities, which also includes the University of Pennsylvania, which is private. It is not state related, but they receive the bulk of research funding for medical, for national defense, for engineering and science development. And again, as I said, a state-run system like PASSHE is making it work by charging students less than $8,000 a semester. Then you have these giants as far as the university system in Pennsylvania that get all of this support and have all these unlimited resources. And in the case of the University of Pennsylvania, their tuition has risen more than 45% in the last 10 years. Right. Yeah. So you have to really, it's hard to know because it is such a complex web. And to be clear, this research funding is very important. The University of Pennsylvania, some of the researchers there that helped develop the mRNA technology for vaccines, they won prizes for that research. University of Pittsburgh does a ton of medical research. There is the University or Penn State that really focuses on national security and engineering. They've done a lot of really important things with their money. So no one's saying, oh, take all of the research money. But what they're saying is, how does this tie into the affordability of these colleges? And there seems to be a lot of debate as to whether or not that should be a factor when we're looking at how to reform tuition for students.
Thank you for your insights, Kristen. Listeners can keep up with this series of stories that Kristen and her team produced at thecentersquare.com, and for ongoing coverage of the state budget,